This is a very interesting conversation today with Scott. He's in South Africa, so there were some parts of the conversation that were influenced by the culture that he's living in and has grown up in, which was quite interesting. Um, Being in different cultures, there's different parts of parenting or communication or whatever that are different culturally. And so it was quite interesting to have Scott respond to something, and automatically it's like all my hair stood on end, and it was I had to work at not interrupting and responding until it was an appropriate time. But it was a very good conversation. It's really inspiring to see a young man who has dabbled in a whole bunch of things, had successes, has had failures and losses, has dealt with, heartbreak and deep depression and substance abuse. And still, he finds a way to tap into what really excites him. And it's about serving others and helping others who need the support that maybe he didn't get at the time. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Too many boys today feel lost, alone, and misunderstood. Too many parents feel the same. Behind today's troubling statistics is a generation of boys longing to be seen, heard, and valued. And yet the conversation around boys' emotional lives is still far too quiet. This new season of Unlocking the Parenting Code is here to change that. This season you'll hear more real conversations with young men, more expert voices on boys' mental health, more solo episodes where I share truths I've learned firsthand, and more wisdom from parents walking this road right now. It's time to open our eyes, open our hearts, and become the change our boys need. Boys aren't broken. They're waiting for us to truly see them, hear them, and stand with them. So tune in to Unlocking the Parenting Code for real conversations, real hope, and a new path forward for our boys. It's time. They're ready. Are we? Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm your host, Kathy, and today I am welcoming Scott Taylor Peak. Scott is a former private investigator and business owner turned mental health coach, focusing on resilience, healing, and reinvention. He is a staunch men's mental advocate, a lover of fine food, wine, and whiskey. He has hosted an international radio show, captained the only South African team to compete in the Paintball World Cup in 2009, and holds IMBD producer credits. He's been from rags to riches multiple times. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you so much for having me.
Scott, if someone were meeting you for the first time and wanted to really understand who you are, not just what you do, what would you want them to know?
Hmm, Good question. That I am basically down to earth, um, easy to get along with, and that I'm just in general, a people's person.
Okay. And if I was going to rewind all the way back to your beginning, what was life like for you growing up? What shaped you as a boy and then, into a man?
So there's multiple sides to that question because my early years, I grew up rather privileged. My parents had a lot of money, and I grew up on a kind of cushy, we'll put it that way.
Mhm.
And from there, they lost their money, and I went from being that cushy to having to really learn to survive, but as a family unit, which was good. And I started working basically from the age of 13 for their coffee shop, and it a big shift. We had moved across the province, which no, sorry, not the province. So we had moved across the country, and by doing that, we went from a city life to literally farm life.
Mm.
overnight. So completely different dynamics, and I had to basically fit in and make the best of a different situation, not a worse situation, but a different situation that I was used to. Um, but in general, I had a good childhood because I saw different sides of life, and got to do a lot of good childhood things, which I think is indicative of anybody born in the early 90s, 80s. We didn't have smartphones. You know, we watched the rise of technology from cassette tapes through to MP3. You know, you ask a lot of kids today, have you ever put a video in a VHS machine? And they'll look at you like you're mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that part I think was great. And also a little bit scary to see how technology is just like progressed within my life.
It is. There's a good book that I just finished reading a while ago called The Anxious Generation. Have you read that one?
I have heard of it, yes.
That's um, it kind of puts more facts and facts and feelings, I guess, into the situation of just what you're talking about, that current generation is being raised, rather with he calls it, not the phone, it's not the phone based childhood
Yeah,
is what he's
that's
calling
it.
it. But yeah, it's a
You
different
know,
world. It is a different world. So
completely.
So was there anything like in your experience that, because you told me and I mentioned a few of them, like you've had a lot of experience in different businesses, different career paths, like you've tried a lot of different things. Was there a particular moment or experience that made you shift your focus from business or entrepreneurship and getting into boys and men's mental health?
So essentially what happened is I hit my own burnout. And I went through a massive depression based on just pressure, and a lot of it I did to myself. There was a lot within my past that I don't think I dealt with properly because I, like most men, didn't want to seek help because I didn't think I needed it. And it was only after I got to a point where I actually put a gun under my chin, um, without maybe not the intention, but I'd hit a proper burnout, that I realized I do need help. And in finding that and finding a coach, I had realized that okay, it does work. And apart from that, my ex girlfriend and her mother had always said to me, go into psychology, go into coaching, go into some side of mental health, because people come to me with their problems often without me even asking about it. I had a business that did really well. It was a tobacconist, and people used to come into the shop all the time and just say to me, listen, I feel like I can talk to you. And they would offload on me, and then I'd say, right, this is what I think about the situation, and I'd give some advice just as a general friend. And I enjoyed it, and because of that, they kind of like forced my hand, and I was quite resilient at first to go into anything. But when I did my first diploma last year in mental health, I realized how much I completely love the subject and love the fact of helping people, because I know what it's like to be in that dark place. So that kind of forced me to really look and reevaluate my life. And I realized slowly that I was actually answering a calling, that I feel is my calling, because I enjoy what I do now in particular. But I realized I enjoyed that side of having, the shop and interacting with people. And because I know firsthand, because of that burnout and depression, and the anger, I watched Silver Linings Playbook the other night again. And what Bradley Cooper's character goes through, the way he acts in that, I could relate so much to that, because it's not a pretty place to be. Um, and on the other side of it, there is healing, but in terms of that, and I'd encourage people to watch that movie to understand a little bit of particularly anger management issues. But I relate a lot to that because that's basically in a way where I was, not completely, but in a way that's where I was. And going through that and now understanding it a bit more, I realized that there are a whole lot of people, in particular men and boys, that don't seek help because they're the societal norms, and I know we'll go into that uh, throughout the interview. But yeah, because of that kind of forced me to reevaluate and then answer what I say is my calling to go into mental health.
So how long ago was that you hit rock bottom, basically?
I would say about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit more. That I went through all those periods. I was actually still coming out on the other end of it when I finished my diploma, which was an interesting time because I was busy doing like the studies, and then a whole lot of things like made sense.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you're looking and going, yeah, wait, I can. That sounds about right, you know. Um,
I
so
think
it was interesting.
some of your best coaches, counselors, doctors, like teachers, anyone who really, finds themselves on a path and has a mission and a passion and a drive, usually it comes from some place of pain that was in themselves and they've grown along with the healing. And then that is what makes it different, why they are different than someone else who's just doing it as not just, but who's doing it as a career. So I think the really great coaches and counselors and people who help, who are in service, they usually come from the path, and that's what makes them.
Yeah.
That's their strength. That's their superpower. So. Okay, so you talked a little bit about culture, and so maybe we'll just tap into it a little bit at this point. But so you were raised in South Africa. You are you? Did you say you're British by citizenship?
No, no, no. I'm
You're
South
South
African.
African. Okay, so
Yeah.
you're a white South African who started in the influential part of society, the entitled society when you were younger, and then you moved into another socioeconomic group. How did that upbringing, all of that, like the culture, the class, the location, how did that shape expectations that you felt as to what it meant to be a boy? Like when you were in elementary school, in middle school, in high school, as you went out, like how did that part of your culture influence what you thought you should be as a boy, as a man?
So there's there's a lot of sides to that question, and it's a good one. But where I think most men and boys can relate, and parents will relate to this as well, is there is a common norm that boys have to be men. You know, men have to be men, and in terms of the stereotypical aspect when I say men, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And South Africa, in particular, uh, men are very proud in South Africa. So a man is basically brought up, and this goes for all cultures and races within South Africa. Brought up very proud, very strong. Uh, we're basically brought up to be the head of the household, to be the end all, the provider, the protector, and the protection side in a country with our sort of crime rates, and that becomes a massive part of it. So you're almost forced to toughen up and be the man by the time you're like 12, and you have to know certain things and do certain things, and there's an expectation on you because of that. So we can bring in rugby, for instance. People ask, what do the Springboks do differently? And often it is, well, South Africans are just built differently. That's very true because we are built differently because we're kind of forced to be. So men and boys in particular have to grow up a lot quicker. We've got to grow up quickly, and that goes across the board. In terms of my side, because I'd seen both ends of the spectrum, so what it is like to be privileged and be part of that sort of, you know, top 10%, 1% um, side, and then going to a completely different class bracket, I found that I had to learn a lot quickly, but it also forced me to take other sides of society into perspective. So where, and I've used this analogy in coaching, where you're at high school and something that's not a big deal to somebody who has no idea is a big deal to someone else. So the analogy that I use is, say you have Becky that goes to a private school, and her entire grade gets the new iPhone. However, her father's just lost her job, or the company's lost its shares, and now suddenly the money's not there, and she can't get that new iPhone. For everybody else that's never been in that sort of class of people, we don't worry about having the new iPhone because it doesn't really matter. My phone works. But for her, it's a complete travesty because she's been in that bubble. So it causes a massive stress for her.
Yeah.
And when you're on the other side, you're kind of laugh and you go, oh, but it's an iPhone. What are you worried about? Stop your crying. But for her, in her world, it is a complete issue, and it causes her massive emotional stress because she's never been on the other side. So in my case, I was able to now suddenly look at the different aspects of society, and particularly a divided society like South Africa, and place myself in different shoes and get a broader picture of it, which helps a lot in coaching, just for that exact reason. So somebody would be like, I don't understand why this person is being like this. Well, let's put it into to their perspective. Let's look at their lifestyle. Let's look at their background. Let's, go into that. And that I think's helped a lot. Sorry, I went a little bit off there, but I think
No,
you get
no,
my
you're
point.
still on target there. Yeah, perspective really changes everything. And I would think um, having the changes that you had while you were growing up would also really increase your level of compassion and empathy because you would have a different knowing, a different understanding. So, but yeah, perspective is what will change everything for everybody. Um,
Yeah.
Scott, if I just ask you to briefly tell me, so I've got a bit of an idea now, a bit of an idea of in South Africa, what, some of the aspects of being a boy, being a man, what are the components that go into making that? What would be your definition for healthy masculinity? Like there's lots of talk about toxic masculinity, but what would you say? And especially like if you're working with men, you're working especially with young boys, with teen boys. What would you say is healthy masculinity?
Yeah, so this I really like that question because there's a lot of focus on toxic masculinity, but masculinity in itself is not a bad thing, will never be a bad thing, because there are the two different energies. So healthy masculinity is still being what you're meant to be, still being strong, still being protective, still showing up, however, within a way that doesn't harm anybody else. So I feel like healthy masculinity is being more aware and being more conscious of everybody else, other energies, you know, accepting feminine, being equal, but still being able to show up, still being strong, protective, providing. Those those fundamentals still need to be carried through, but with an open mind, and that you cannot enforce yourself on anybody else that doesn't need it or doesn't want it. And I mean that in the way of not walking into a room and just expecting respect or anything like that. No, it has to be earned. Respect for respect,
So,
and not over treading anybody, and going over them.
so what would you say would be the core values around healthy masculinity?
So, um, like I say, I like the almost the stereotypical ones, but looked at it in a proper way. So protection, providing, being the head and being the voice of reason. Could build onto it, but I'd have to actually give it some
With
proper
that,
thought.
that's okay.
But
That's a
yeah,
good, that's a good start.
yeah.
So one of the things
Well,
that I really wanted to get more deeply into based on what you had written on the intake form was connected with young teen boys. You said that's one of the areas that is a focus for you. And I wanted to understand and hear a little bit why you have that focus. Like what makes this age different? Like say from 14 to 18, emotionally, developmentally, what makes it different for you? When I was raising my son, I longed for a guide, something real, honest, and grounded in what boys truly need. So I created the book that I wish I'd had. Packed with tools and real world strategies that actually work, you'll learn how to nurture his emotional world and finally understand the feelings behind his behavior. Because boys don't need punishment, they need guidance. We'll bust the myths that keep boys boxed in and help you support him through the real challenges of growing up. Most of all, it's about transforming your connection, one small moment at a time. Raising boys who become remarkable men. Get your copy today, and let's create a beautiful future together.
I think this is it's one of those. It's the start of your life, and that's exactly when the hormones are going, and you're really starting to step in who you're going to be as a man, as a person, and because of that, the way the world has gone, and you spoke about it earlier with the book, The Anxiety Generation, particularly today, there's the structures and the way the world's gone, and the multiple influences that teenagers in particular have on a daily basis with social media, with the internet. There's a lot of confusion, and I feel like there's a lot of kids that are not being grounded in the way that they should be. And when I say grounded, I mean by getting a proper perspective of the world, because they're being influenced by so many different aspects, so many different sources continuously. So it's not just your teachers and your parents and your siblings and your friends. Now it's whatever the algorithm's throwing at them. And because of that, there's a lot of confusion, and you can see the way the anxiety's gone up, depression's gone up, burnout's gone up, in particular with teens. There's a whole lot of a whole generation that are just really confused, and it's not their fault. It's the adults' fault, because we've thrown screens at them, we've thrown whatever they need at them, and a lot of the time it's almost cushy because it's easier to parent in that way. So particularly with men, there is no structure, and it's not their fault. But I like to believe that I want to. I like to believe that I want to. I like to believe that I can help in just getting that grounding and going back a little bit back to basics, so that there is some structure, so that there is some discipline and grounding of what it takes and where they need to go. And with that, helping calm their anxiety and making them more resilient today, instead of relying on their screen.
In that particular stage of development, even boys who have a very strong attachment and a good relationship with their parents, that's the particular time that there is a real drive and a strong influence or impact that comes from both peers and other male mentors. So if you can actually connect with a young boy during that time, and like you can have a very, very positive impact on their
Mm.
development because it's like one of those I forget what the word is. It's like when you're in your zone of genius, that's one of the open critical areas to tap into that particular resource. So what you're doing, like working with boys that age, is it lines up beautifully as far as
Yeah.
the impact that you can have. So another thing that I wanted to get into, and again, I thought it was quite interesting because on the intake form, you said something about, to the reference, about boys feeling heartache more deeply than society expects. And when I looked into that a little bit deeper, and I was looking at some stats in South Africa, and it said research shows that relationship breakdown can elevate suicide risk in young men by nearly 9 times. And that's
Yeah.
radically higher than typical stressors.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that whole, like that's just such a
So
serious thing and it's so painful and they feel things so deeply.
yeah.
But
So in South Africa, to build on that, there are roughly 13,000 suicides a year. Out of those 13,000, 10,000 are men, which is an absolutely frightening statistic. And from a little bit more research, and as you go into it, a lot of that is to do with heartbreak. A lot of it's financial because of the way the economy's gone, but there is a massive side of it which is heartbreak. And because society has basically taught men to toughen up and man up and just get over her, and the older you get, it's just get under somebody else, and you've got all those sort of stereotype ways to deal with a breakup, have a drink, etc. We don't deal with it properly, and I feel, and this is both from personal experience and from what I've heard and seen what other men have gone through. Men break. We do. We hurt, and we take it very seriously, particularly when our core values have been shaken, particularly when we've been betrayed, and we break, we shut down, and because of the normal aspect of not talking about it, we hold in so much that eventually it boils over, and men just don't talk about it, and that's what drives the suicide rate out. Men break very, very hard, but we don't talk about it because it's not normal to talk about it. And
so how, okay,
even
but
even
how do you know it is? Because it's different from the girls and the boys, right? You know when a girl's heart is broken.
yeah.
How do you know when a boy's is broken?
Well, this is it. They either spiral, they put on a mask, and they bottle it up, and that's sad, and it's from both sides of society. A lot of women will look at it and be like, yeah, but men don't do that. Men don't get their heart broken. Men, will just carry on. He just will find somebody else. You they don't care. They're not thinking with their head. They're thinking with their pants. All those sort of terms that get thrown around. So the men just think, well, that's what they have to do because that's what society expects. We're not allowed to show weakness. We're not allowed to say, I'm actually sad. She hurt me. He hurt me. That doesn't matter. We're too almost stubborn and scared to say that, but it's because of the way that we've been raised, the way we've been brought up. And the more and more you speak to men that have gone through heartbreak and had their heart broken, you find out how badly they were hurt. And a lot of the time, guys will admit once they get talking and say, "Yeah, I was actually ready to leave this world," based on a relationship. It's
So
very sad and very scary.
it definitely is. And another confusion that I have heard, like in interviewing with men and having these conversations, is that because there's this move to, men should be more vulnerable, men should be talking about their feelings more. But what I'm hearing from some young men is that if they do that, with, a romantically involved person, that they really risk losing that relationship because all of a sudden she thinks he's weak. So
Yeah,
they're in a real conundrum as far as, well, I'm supposed to be this way, but now, society has a little bit different expectations. But if you go too far down that vulnerable road, then that comes back to, hit you on the side of the head. So,
yeah.
is that the same kind of situation in South Africa that you find with boys and young men?
100%. Like I said earlier, particularly South African men are raised very strong, very proud, and the moment that you interact that, it's like, okay, but now am I being too vulnerable? Is she gonna, think that I'm less of a man because of what we're doing? I'm meant to be the ultimate pillar of strength. So it's I think men are trying to find the fine line. They're trying to find the balancing act, and it is difficult because you're scared to be too vulnerable for that exact reason. Are they going to look at me of less of a man if I shed a tear?
In in a lot of the material that I've seen and any research that I've looked at, the country and the culture that impresses me the most as far as being a little bit further ahead than the rest of us in understanding and supporting men is Australia. And there's
Yeah.
quite a movement there for providing spaces for men to talk together, to support each other. Um, it's spreading to other places, but I can pick up easily really good examples from there. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, because whenever I have looked into the concept of rites of passage for boys, because that's not really common anymore, except in some traditions like Judaism with the bar mitzvah. There's not
Yeah.
so many other examples of rites of passage, which also causes, I think, chaos and havoc in a young boy's life because they don't really have any signal as to when they're moving from boyhood and should be moving into manhood. And often when I'm reading research things, um, when they're talking, explaining what a rites of passage is, a lot of stories come back to Africa and how in traditional tribes, rites of passage for boys, like what that looked like. And so probably this is not a very intelligent question, but just because you are in that culture, is there any leftover? Is there any remnants of that in normal society today?
Yes, there is. So, in particular in South Africa, the Xhosa tribe still do a circumcision ceremony when the boys get to. I believe it's about 12 years old. Um, could be wrong, but there are. It's actually quite sad because every year boys die. Um, there are people that do it right and they take it more seriously in terms of like the health and that sort of thing. But then there's like the staunch traditionalists who will send the boys up into the mountains, and the sangoma or witch doctor will do the procedure with usually not an hygienic blade or anything like that. And often, pretty much every year, things go wrong and boys die. So there are those that are still there, and there are different traditions in terms of the Zulu culture. They have their own ceremonies, but we have definitely lost good ways for men or boys to become men. And I think that's where, in a way, a bar mitzvah is still a beautiful tradition because it's signally that that step forward to manhood. Um, in your Afrikaans culture, a lot of the boys go hunting, but
Mhm.
that starts at any age.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a valid point because we've lost as modern society, we've lost those. So women still depending on high society or in high society, they do the coming out parties. Um, and have that tradition of the dresses and everything else and that. But yeah, men really have lost that aspect, and there is nothing to signal like, right, you're a man now. Certain families will still give a pocket knife when the son turns 13 or a
Mhm.
decent watch, but a lot of that's just kind of faded out of society.
Yeah, I think I personally think that that's one of the areas that would be so easy to, um, develop it so that, like for young girls, when they have their first menstrual cycle, it's an automatic, everybody knows, okay, she's not a little girl anymore. She's moving into womanhood. And she really
Yeah,
does have a bit of a village around her because other women will, give her the support she needs to understand the hormones she's going through and so on and so forth. So there's guidance, but there's not
yeah,
anything similar. Like I would never suggest or condone circumcision at 12 years old. I think that's rather, I cringe just to think of that.
yeah,
Um, but you know, for boys to have that support from other men, to have an understanding that it's time to put away boyish ways and start to move into manhood with the responsibilities and respect that comes um, from performing those responsibilities, taking more,
yeah,
independent ways. So it is a movement in some places, but
yeah,
so I was wondering if in everyday culture in South Africa there was anything about that.
yeah. It's something that I would encourage parents, particularly fathers. But I mean, it doesn't matter. But I would particularly actually encourage parents on that as we go into that too, even if it's a family tradition. And there's never a wrong time to start a family tradition, that could start this within this generation of your family. But having something like the pocket knife or like a real watch or something like that when they get to 12, 13 years old, I think is a great way to do it, just to signify that little launch, of right, you're becoming a man.
So when our son was 11, we moved from Japan. We moved to Beirut, so it was a completely different environment, um, creating a whole new world for ourselves and the family as a whole. And that's when I started thinking about this rites of passage. And within the 2 years, like before he was turning 13, because I am the one who's like I get into stuff like this. I like to organize it, and so I created one for him when he was approaching 13. And but I understood that was not my place. I could not be part of that. So I arranged everything. I had great role models for him to come to this gathering, a surprise party. I had engaged in family members and men that I look up to who weren't in the same location to write him letters. But it like I thought it was beautiful. I have no proof of what the outcome was, but each man shared a story about challenges they had moving from boyhood to manhood and what they wish they had known at the time. And then the other thing that they did is they all had some momentum to
Mm.
help my son remember, like when he looked at that little elephant. Oh, that was the story that Uncle Brian, told about whatever. Um, but it was, it took a little bit of work and effort. It wasn't at the level that you see these established ones in, like, for example, in Australia, but it's something.
Mm.
And so,
Mm.
and it's just men. And it's at that developmental time of boys that you start working with where they are questioning, they are feeling like they're developing their identity during that period of time. And I would guess to have strong male mentors and something where they felt, oh, things are changing and that's
Yeah.
recognized. And some of the positive outcomes of that is sometimes as those young boys are going through their teens, they don't feel as much of a need to prove themselves, like through risky
Mm.
behavior or substance abuse, because it's already been recognized. So they don't have to prove that they're a man. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the biggest part of that. What do you think about all of that?
I I I think you've hit the nail on the head. Um, there's that thing of like I need to prove myself.
Yeah.
So you can still see it. I'm not sure what the drinking laws are in Japan, but here it's from 18. And once you get to your 30s and that, you kind of laugh in a way at the new 18 to 22-year olds when you see them out because there is still this aspect of I need to prove I'm a man.
Hmm. Yeah.
And most of the time when there's a fight, and I know this from when I was managing a nightclub, you would see them walk in, and yes, legally they're allowed to be there and that, but you just almost instinctively knew, particularly if it was like a Friday night, that there was going to be a drama because it's this whole I need to prove myself. I need to
Yeah.
prove to society that I am a man. You know, I
Yeah.
can outdrink you, I can outfight you, I can, pick up this many chicks. There's that whole need to prove, and it's proving to themselves, but proving to everybody around
Yeah.
them. So I think that's a very, very important aspect that you've just brought up. And I would believe that that's everywhere.
Mhm. I would think so. And I think it's an
Yeah,
easy fix. Takes a little bit of, thinking, but I think it's something that, is doable for a society.
yeah,
I wanted to
definitely.
ask you what your thoughts were when you wrote something about, you said discipline. You said it's still needed, maybe more than ever. So what were you thinking about? Like, what does healthy discipline look like for a teen boy,
Yeah.
for example?
So I think this is in a big way where I think society's failed us, but you have to take it looking at the greater scheme of things and put it into perspective. So corporal punishment on its own, because it was being abused and it's been abused throughout society, it's a very difficult thing to say, right, cool, give your child a smack. Now, my personal beliefs, I do believe that a physical aspect to things can work. However, it needs to be done in the right manner. And where people go the extra mile, they beat their children, and that's absolutely ridiculous and barbaric. But I look at my own upbringing, and my parents basically raised me to Dr. James Dobson's uh, teachings, where I did get smacked, but I was never smacked with a hand. I was smacked with something else. But my parents, depending on who was doing it, would sit down. They would calm down themselves. So it was never being hit out of anger, because often it's instant reaction, and that's also not the way to go. But I would be sat down. It would be explained to me. They would go calm down. I would calm down, and then it would happen. But it wasn't overboard. It wasn't anything like that, and that worked. But society's changed, so I have to take that into account as well. Things aren't the way like they were in the late 80s, early 90s, and we have to look at new forms of discipline. But discipline absolutely needs to be there. Just like, and this is going to sound weird, but it will make sense. Is look at it when you're training a puppy from when you get it and it's young. The puppy basically works on structure. Same thing with children. They need structure, they need boundaries. And those boundaries, if they're pushed or if they break the law, they need to be punished. Not in a way that's going to scar them for the rest of their lives. They need to understand the difference between right and wrong. They need to understand that if you cross the line, something bad is going to happen. Often, when we look at particularly young parents, is there's no structure in terms of bedtimes. There's no structure in terms of screen times. There's no structure in terms of if you don't eat that, well, then you're not getting more. We bend to the will of the children a lot of the time, in particular boys. So when they get to their teenage years and their formative years, and go into adulthood, they don't realize that you can't just get what you want. You can't just do what you want. It needs to be done within reason, and that starts with the discipline. Parents need to discipline their kids because if you don't, then it's a free for all, and that causes issues later on down the road. And a lot of the times, I've watched videos of 20-year-olds in America screaming at the police when the cops are going, "But what you did is you broke the law." And they scream and they just like, "Well, I'm going to phone my parents." The parents get there. You can't help it if it's the law has been broken, and you can see often that that's been throughout their entire childhood. And only when they're standing in the docket do they realize, well, I can't get away with this. And that's a very easy fix. So it's just about finding the fine line between actual discipline that works. And every child is different, particularly if, with neurodivergence becoming more and more common. You can't just smack a child or send them to the corner to look. You look in the corner, and the more old school aspects of discipline. So you need to find out what works for your child, but discipline is 100% vital in their growing up.
Okay, so the whole time that you're talking about this, my heart is just kind of thumping, and it's like because it's very triggering to me, very triggering. And but I listened very, very carefully, trying not to let that trigger keep me from hearing what you were saying. And the one thing that I'd like you to consider and talk about is like why why as a society do we think discipline is the same as punishment? And do you think that you can have discipline without punishment?
100%. I think that's a lovely way to look at it. Maybe the wording on the form wasn't correct, but I completely hear what you're saying, and I appreciate you actually listening because I know it's one of those subjects where people get sit
Yeah.
sit on either side, and it is a very debated subject. Um, so it is difficult. So I really appreciate you actually listening in that. Um, Something a lot of people don't do. We get triggered and then
Well,
we
yes,
go with our emotions.
yeah, it's a conscious thing, but it's
Yeah.
kind of like I really believe in raising children in an environment that like really is full of love and acceptance and
Mm,
compassion and
mm,
empathy and all those good, warm and fuzzy things. But I
mm,
also believe in being firm,
mm,
strict, having boundaries, and but it's not in my opinion, and like I spent my whole career in the classroom. So
mm,
discipline was always a big part of life there, and especially with boys. Like it's the
mm.
boys that you will find who act out because that's how they're showing their emotions is through usually through negative behavior, which is another thing. Maybe that's not their fault because the school systems don't provide the environment that they would
Yeah.
thrive in. But as far as punishment goes, in general, my feeling is when a child is punished, the one thing that does definitely is it severs or greatly alters the connection they have with the person who's doing the
Mm,
punishment.
mm,
And so, if there was another way to help, like to me, discipline means guidance.
mm.
So, if there, y- you actually, as a parent, you hope your children screw up while they're still living under your roof so that you can guide them. But
Yeah,
and if you just punish, then as soon as they're out of your part of the world, they're going to be doing something else. Like it doesn't teach them.
yeah,
And so I would really struggle. Like to me, that's what it is. Discipline is guidance. The
yeah,
result of punishment is that you sever connections, and what you need for healthy relationships together is strong connections.
yeah. And I think with what you've just said, we add proper communication,
Yeah, absolutely.
so that the discipline side's there, the boundaries are there, and then when those are broken, the communication's there. So you don't need the corporal punishment, the physical punishment. It's to communicate and be
Yeah,
like, what you did was wrong. I need you to understand that.
yeah,
And getting through to them, because that guides it. And I think, like I said, when I look at the way that I was raised, and we can't do that anymore. One of the biggest parts was that complete communication of sitting and going,
yeah.
this is why this is happening, you know, and that gets through, I think, far more to the child than the punishment, particularly anything physical.
So isn't like I could be wrong and I could be making assumptions here, but just as you were saying that, it was making me think that you're exactly what you're doing. If a young teen comes to you, it might be because of misbehavior, and so the parents are sending them to you.
Yeah,
But then the effective role that you would be taking would be guiding them. You would
yeah,
be the person trying to help them understand what happened, why it happened, you know, why it didn't work out. Like you would be going through all the things as the coach. And that's basically the same way I think if parents followed that same, like just taking physical punishment off the
yeah,
table.
yeah, because obviously I can't do that.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
so it is it's that communication, and then also a lot of the time it's understanding why that a boundary was broken or anything like that.
Yeah.
Why, what happened, is this the structures that are being put in place, does it work with the individual? So again, that communication and just getting that connection and going, okay, well, I need you to understand this. Those were there for a reason, not to make your life hard, to make your life better, to educate you, you know. But yeah, it would be completely down to the communication and then putting those structures in place. And often it will be, somebody who's going through an emotional time and doesn't understand, and the parents don't know how to handle it, or just want to literally help their child.
Yeah. So, what do you think is the most important thing for two components for if a parent was listening to this today? What's the most important thing they take out of our conversation? And if a young man or a teen was listening, what do you think is the most important thing? Could be the same or it could be different.
Communication,
Yeah,
communication, and love. Feel, there's nothing wrong with feeling, with loving, but it needs to be communicated. And the more you can verbalize that, write a letter, sing a song,
yeah,
anything like that that can help will just get it out there. And once it's out, everybody feels better, and we'll know where to go, and that'll help society, as in the larger aspect.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Before we finish today, Scott, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had of?
So my brain's been ticking now for but in a
I
good way,
know.
a very good way. No, I think we're good.
Well, okay, I'll ask you one question, just curiosity on my part.
Go for it.
How prevalent is, like in South Africa, in the area that you're in, or even just in general, South Africa, how prevalent is um, coaches or consultants or therapists? How prevalent is it that men actually go for help, or do you know?
Unfortunately, not enough. Um, Men haven't. We're starting to open up, and I would put this into race categories. I think a lot more white men are starting to open up and starting to accept the fact that they need help. But the broader society, definitely not enough. And this goes through to the travesty that is our healthcare system, in the fact that our entire healthcare system is basically it's broken. And if you have a headache, you've got to stand in a queue for 6 hours on average just to get a
Wow.
potato or basic medication because of the and that's government healthcare. So mental health care, unfortunately, has become quite a privileged thing. Um, a lot of people literally can't afford to see a therapist or a coach, and that I kind of structure my fees as reasonably as I can. But even that, people just don't have the funds in that, and men shy away from it because they think it's a waste of time, and that's sad, but that's the truth.
So how are you thinking that you're going to approach that problem? Like say you're not reaching those people, but you know they would really benefit from
Mm.
having your support. Like how do you try to reach people to learn more, to understand more?
So I'm doing a lot of social media content, but when people do approach me and they start to talk, and I'm going to express this more in videos. In I approach the conversation as a whole completely differently. So it's more of talking to somebody that you can relate to, that I can completely empathize with a whole lot of topics. But you're almost talking to a friend. You're almost talking to a family member, and that takes out the stereotype of lying on a couch and talking about your feelings and talking about your mother and your father. That a lot of people have in their head because of too much TV and thinking that that's what it's like. Whereas often when people talk to me and they find out what I do, I structure it and I say it's basically the same thing, but I ask you a different series of questions. And with coaching, it's all goal orientated because I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a coach. So it's all goal orientated. What life do you want to live? Okay, if we've got that goal, now we can put the things to place. And we will go into your past and we'll find out what's making you tick, if there's anxiety, if the, so that still goes into it, but it's approached differently. And
Yeah.
I just need to put the fact that I do approach everything differently in that way. So a lot of the time someone will say to me, listen, do you mind if I have a beer? Well, I'm a coach, have a beer. As long as we're having a connection, as long as you can trust me and I can trust you, because it goes both ways. Once that's in place, then we start to see results. So
Yeah.
it's just a matter of trying to get through to the men that what I do is a little bit different because it's goal orientated, and you're not going to be lying on the couch.
Are there any men's groups, like men's support groups?
Yeah, we do have a lot of them are church based, which is
Okay.
great if you're religious.
Yeah.
Uh, the problem is a lot of guys don't want that, and a lot of the time they clicks, and a lot of the
Mhm.
time there's just not enough trust
Yeah.
of trusting the system and that. But there are men's groups, and we do have lifeline, suicide hotlines, etc. For free. So there are different structures. It's just it all boils down to that stereotype of I don't want to look weak.
Yeah.
I don't want to look weak in front of women, and I particularly don't want to look weak in front of other men. And we need to break down that boundary. We need to break down those walls.
Where would you like to see yourself in 5 years connected with this, connected with your working with men and mental health?
So I started something a little while back. We've only done one or two, but what we call Man Cuck Monday, which is the word cuck is a South African word for shit.
Mm.
So just a nice environment, and I'd like that to go a bit more viral in some ways for men to connect in whatever environment makes them more comfortable, but just to talk about their stuff. And if I can have an impact on that, going a little bit more out there throughout South Africa and potentially the world, that would be great. I would like to be almost a go-to person that people will share my videos and that and be like, listen, bud, I know you're going through this, and something that relates. If the content's there, I'd like to be that person within the next 5 years. Um, and there's amazing coaches. I mean, Tony Robbins that I followed for years. I love him and I love his stuff. There's a local guy by the name of Vusi Tembawayo. I love his stuff. So I'd like to be one of those, one of
Okay.
those sort
Yeah.
of coaches that are out there, and people can reference.
Well, I think anything is possible. I think it's all about putting yourself out there, doing the work yourself,
Yeah,
continuing to learn yourself. And when you're good at what you're doing and when it's the right thing for you to be doing, word gets around, things happen. And so 5 years, it might be exactly what you're hoping it's going to be. I hope so. I hope for
yeah.
you.
Thank you
Where
so
where
much.
can listeners connect with you or learn more about your work?
So my social media handles, it's pretty simple. Just Scott Taylor Peak. You will find that, and then I operate under Speak to Scotty. So no,
Okay.
nothing fancy. Just simply Speak to Scotty.
All right. I'll include those below. So
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
Scott. It's been a pleasure. I know how precious time is, and I hope that you feel that yours was honored today. I'm sure that this conversation will impact people, and I think it's just a very uplifting conversation to know that there are people who have pulled themselves up and are wanting to help others do the same thing. So, thank you for the
100%.
conversation.
No problem. And yeah, hopefully it gets people thinking. That's what we want.
Exactly. And thank you to the listeners for joining us on Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. Be sure to check out Scott's links in the show notes and don't forget to subscribe, share, and tune in next week for more conversations about boys and men. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Every conversation we have here is a step toward raising boys who feel seen, heard, and deeply valued. If you're looking for more support on this journey, I invite you to visit me at sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for being part of this important movement. Until next time, take good care.